they can basically just take the last contract that was done at their position and say, I want a little bit more money than that.
They came in as an agent. Players say, hey, this guy's pretty cool. He's a former agent. I don't need to pay my agent fee. I'll negotiate directly with him. I'm like, great. This will be fun.
I think they want to be very careful around not setting a precedent of, hey, if you don't like your deal, we're going to let you get out of it.
We have this consternation in the media about, who's going to buy the NBC Peacock game? Well, everyone's buying it. Who's going to buy the Black Friday game? Everyone. And this guy, I saw the video, he comes in, hey, we're going to give you all $100,000.
All right, Andrew. So the place I want to start today is with some of the NFL issues that we've seen going on. We'll get to Netflix and the streaming deal that they just signed. But first, I want to talk about the agent business, right? Yeah. And we've seen a couple of players over the last few years do these deals without agents. Lamar Jackson comes to mind. DeAndre Hopkins comes to mind. A bunch of other players have done it as well. But now we're seeing some of these rookies do it as well, namely Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. And each of them have had these kind of issues pop up around the process kind of here and there that have come to our attention. And I know that you've negotiated some of these deals. You've literally sat at the table with some of these people. So I want to just get some insight. I want to start with rookies first, right? What does this process look like for a rookie when they come in, and how much of an impact can an agent actually make?
Yeah, Joe, it's a great question. And for the listeners that don't know, I spent a decade each on each side here. So a decade as a player agent back at the start of my career, and a decade doing contracts for the Packers on the other side of the table as the second chapter of my career. So really, I've seen it from both sides. A couple of things that date me a little bit. Back in the day when I did contracts both on the player side and the team side, they weren't as prepackaged, prefabricated, predetermined as they are now. In other words, the latest CBAs on all sports, but specifically the NFL in both 2011 and 2020, really kind of preset the numbers for the draft. So if you're the 20th pick in the first round, if you're the 30th pick in the fourth round, you know exactly what you're going to make the night of the draft. So as people are listening to this, they say, well, what do you need an agent for? So it's fine that these players are doing without an agent. Well, for the money, that's a good supposition. You really don't, because you know what the bonus is and you know what the salaries are. And there's some prepackaged escalators in year 3 and 4. Everybody signs a 4-year deal. Here's where you do need an agent. And these are more subtle, more nuanced parts of a contract. Language. A lot of what I did as a negotiator was beyond the numbers, the backside of the contract. Language really concerns what happens when things go south, when someone screws up, when the player's no good or the player has off-field problems. That's what you're really trying to protect as a negotiator from both sides, from the player side and the team side. So a good negotiator will address issues like forfeiture. In other words, what money do you have to give back if you screw up? What future money becomes non-guaranteed that was guaranteed? And one thing about these rookie contracts at the top, especially, they're fully guaranteed. In the second round, 3 out of 4 years guaranteed. That's a lot of guarantee. So you would negotiate, okay, if this happens, the future guarantees are void. Give you an example. If a player gets suspended a game, just one game, it could be on field, it could be off field. A lot of contracts say no more future guarantees, void. If you're a good lawyer for the player side, you say, no. It has to be at least a 4-game suspension. In other words, if a player is caught and arrested and it doesn't look good, does that void future guarantees? Well, the team would say yes. The player would say, no. It's got to be a conviction. It's got to go through the legal process. It can't just be a charge like Scotty Scheffler or something. It can't just be that. So anyway, those are things you can note. And the other thing is bonus payout. We read about these big bonuses, especially for first rounders, $20, $30 million bonuses. But nowhere in the CBA prefabricated numbers is how you pay it out. On the team side, you want to defer. You want to pay that over 2, 3, 4 years. On the player side, you want it now. So a good agent or a good team negotiator really works on that. So I'm not saying a player can't do that, but this is where a player would need advice beyond the numbers, language and bonus payout specifically.
So I've sort of gone back and forth on this, and the reason I bring it up is because I actually wrote a newsletter and made a video on this a few weeks ago, and
Yeah.
it inspired some back and forth. And I actually had an agent, a very popular agent, reach out to me, and I thought at first he was going to say, this is bullshit. Don't be spreading this stuff. Agents are necessary, but he actually had a very nuanced take, and he totally understood it for these very high level guys, right? And the examples we talked through were DeAndre Hopkins and Lamar Jackson. And essentially what he said was, look, those guys are the 1% of the 1%. They
Right.
can basically just take the last contract that was done at their position and say, I want a little bit more money than that. And there's some language things around that. And maybe they have advisors that they're paying a flat rate to rather than commission. And sure, it's great. The problem arises, though, when you're not that player. And there's a few different instances where that can certainly come up with lower round guys. But even if you're, a top 5 pick, but not number 1, or top 10, but not number 1. And I won't say his name because I didn't okay with him, but he's a very popular agent. He actually gave me a specific example of one of his clients. He said one of his clients was drafted in like the top 5, top 10 a couple years ago. And when they got drafted, like you said, everything's preset. The bonus, the terms, everything was already set. But when it came to the signing bonus specifically, the team wanted to pay it out over a number of months rather than up front and potentially a couple of years. And what he said is, hey, look, I know you guys have done this because not every team is the same. So some teams are willing to do things that others aren't. But he said, I know you guys have done this. I'll tell you right now, we'll agree to the contract as is. Right up front, he'll be the first rookie out of all the class to sign his contract. You'll get good publicity out of it. You won't have to worry about holdouts, anything like that. But you got to pay us the money now. And he essentially got the money, or at least the first payment of the money, like 2.5 months before he would have got it otherwise. And we can do time value of money and say that's worth X number of dollars, but I think everyone can understand that that's worth something. And if he wasn't the agent for that player, maybe they wouldn't have gotten that.
Right.
Now, again, the argument that I made was that if you're the number 1 overall player, like Caleb Williams, and you made millions of dollars of NIL in college, maybe it's not as necessary. And the other thing that he said to me that I thought was really interesting was that he said that one of the things that goes under the radar a lot is how much agents help out with PR leading up to the draft, right? So he said that Caleb specifically, there was a number of things. If you remember the equity, if you remember, people were saying that his dad was an issue, that he wasn't not going to play for the Bears, the locker room stuff. There was a whole host of issues that came up around him that were talked about by people in and outside of NFL circles. And it really shaped the opinion of people, fans of the NFL, around him. And what he told me was that Caleb Williams had PR people working for him, but they just didn't have the right connections and do a good enough job. And an agent in that case could have nipped some of these things in the bud where he would have been worth that fee. And to talk about someone like Caleb Williams, an agent, this would have done this for practically nothing, knowing that he could have done it without them. And then they're hoping at some point down the road, they would either have a marketing guarantee where they're, going to get some kind of percentage of his marketing money, or they're looking for that next contract, which could potentially be hundreds of millions of dollars if he performs well.
Let me say a couple of things. Number one, I think that agent was very smart. And the other thing that people don't know is that, let me just say this, agents have a great value to me in buffering. This player negotiations are raw. You're telling somebody their worth, even if it's predetermined by the CBA. And
as in players will take an offense to things that you guys say?
Players see it very simply. One of the things, Joe, I did at the Packers, because I came in as an agent, players say, hey, this guy's pretty cool. He's a former agent. I don't need to pay my agent fee. I'll negotiate directly with him. I'm like, great, this will be fun. And I negotiated with some players in the Packers that wanted to do it directly with me. I tell you, Joe, it was not a good experience because of what I just talked about. These are emotional. And I'm basically telling players they're not as good as they thought, or they're not as worthy to the Packers as their peers are to the Cowboys, the Patriots, the Eagles, the Giants, etc. They see it very simply. The Giants, the Patriots, the Eagles, they paid that guy X. I'm better than him. Pay me more than X.
Whether the stats say it or not, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say, beyond the talent, I would have to say, he's 1 year away from free agency. You're 2 years away from free agency. We're paying Aaron Rodgers $20 million a year. They're paying their quarterback $4 million a year. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that. Andrew, what's wrong? Why do you not see me like the Patriots see their guy, or whatever it was? And it was difficult. And I admit to you, I lost friendships. I didn't want to be the guy upstairs the meanie doing the contracts. But that's exactly what I had to do in those situations. So I miss the value of agents for that. I really miss that an agent would take my words and, as I say, buffer them, present them to the player in a light that doesn't really get them upset at us. Or if they're upset at us, they work it out with the agent. So that was frustrating. The other part I want to tell you is full disclosure. I have helped players without agents in my independent role I'm in the past 10 years. And I won't say the players' names. I told them I would never do that. But some of the things I help them with are just understanding, why a team wants to do something this way, how teams are so concerned with future guarantees, how that makes such a difference in their bottom line and have to fund it, and the precedent for future players. And then on the other hand, tell them, I think the team should be doing more of this. And I would tell the player, ask for this in a nice way. I would write their email back for them, things like that. So I understand where players come from with this. But what Marvin Harrison and Caleb Williams are doing without an agent, I think it's good. I think it gives them an exposure to the business side that they need, and the money is set. I hope they're having advice. It's not me, I can tell you that gives them proper guidance on some of these more subtle aspects of the contract.
Well, the Marvin Harrison Jr. conversation is a little bit different to me, right? He's in the same boat where he doesn't have a traditional agent. I think he's being represented by his dad, who is obviously a great NFL player, and Caleb Williams is in the same boat. But some of the PR stuff with Caleb Williams is kind of done with, right? He got drafted. Everything seems to be okay. He's going to play for them. He's their starting quarterback. No problem. Marvin Harrison Jr., some of these things are not only coming up, but they're getting worse as time goes on, right? So the best example of this is Fanatics. Fanatics filed a lawsuit against him, basically saying that he hasn't honored their contract that they signed last year with him. And Fanatics says right in the lawsuit, I'm sure you've read at this point, that they've worked with over 3,000 NFL players, and they've never filed a lawsuit against any of them, right? And the situation is fairly simple for those who don't or haven't followed it. Marvin Harrison Jr. and his camp are essentially saying that they don't have a deal in place with Fanatics, and they want to go sign a trading card deal. Now, it's important to stipulate that this is different from the NFL's group licensing agreement. The group licensing agreement allows Fanatics to sell your jersey. It puts you in video games. It allows the NFLPA to go out and negotiate on your behalf licensing deals. Now, the best players in the NFL are making a few $1 million a year from that group licensing agreement. The bottom tier players in the NFL are making, tens of thousands of dollars. So there's a little bit of a range there. But what Marvin Harrison Jr. had was different. Fanatics came to him in college and said, we want to sign you to an autograph deal. You're going to sign footballs, helmets, trading cards, whatever we have for you. You're going to get X number of dollars. I've heard that it was over $1 million. And we're going to pay you this kind of scheduled rate. There's some incentives in there if you get drafted in the top 10, if you become a Pro Bowler, if you win a Super Bowl, if you win an MVP award, whatever it is. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is now saying, I didn't sign that, right? He has filtered this through a few different media personalities, including Pat McAfee, who said it on his show last week. Fanatics is very clearly saying, you did sign it, right? And someone asked me, hey, Joe, why would there be a discrepancy of whether he signed it or not? And my whole thing is, well, he probably signed it, right? If Fanatics is willing to file a lawsuit the first time out of 3,000 players that they've worked with, they're going to have to present evidence that he signed the document, which they're potentially going to be able to do. Fanatics is now saying that he went back and he wanted to renegotiate the terms, probably because he's been offered more money by other competitors or thinks he's deserving of more money now that he's not in the NFL. The problem with this is that I've been told, and I think this was redacted from the lawsuit, but maybe it's in there somewhere, was that he's already been paid 6 figures of the 7-figure sum, right? So not only does he know that he signed the agreement, but he's already been paid money from the agreement, and now he wants to go and renegotiate the agreement. And I'm curious your take on this, but my understanding of it is like, this is something where an agent or a business partner that has done these deals before would probably tell you that the juice is not worth the squeeze, and you should probably just honor the contract that you signed, even if you think that you're worth a little bit more today than you were a year ago. What is your overall opinion and kind of just analysis of that disagreement and deal overall?
Well, there's never a good sign when a multi-billion-dollar company is suing the first athlete of 3,000 athletes. As you said, if he's earned money on this, they've acted upon the agreement. That's going to be a big thing for a jury to weigh if it goes to trial. they've acted upon this, whether it's a binding term sheet, whether it's a fully blown contract, hundreds of thousands have been paid out of 7-figure deal. It's not good for Harrison. We don't know the full thing. I've read the 18-page complaint. It's highly redacted. As you said, you don't see a lot of information about money or terms. But what's interesting to me is that Harrison continues to be obstinate about this with his advice, his dad, Marvin Harrison Sr., and whoever else is advising him. I don't know where he thinks this is going to go. I guess looking back, you sort of say, well, when you did this deal in May of 2023, a year ago, maybe you should have been more demanding about the bump if you go top 5 in the NFL. If you go to, I don't know, if something happens where you're much more vaunted than maybe you were thinking about a year ago. So this probably is just a salvo to try to get Harrison to settle.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the one little piece of good news for Harrison, this is a request for a jury trial. And just thinking about a jury of normal people going up there, there's an empathy factor to an athlete who's going to be well known no matter what jury hears it. He's obviously one of the highest well-known players in college football, going up against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Now, I don't know if he'll paint himself as unadvised or no matter what the counsel he had, and I think he did have good counsel on this. Maybe a jury says, geez, they're trying to take advantage of this poor young kid and he should make more, and look what other companies would pay him. But stepping back as a lawyer beyond that empathetic note does not look like a good case for Harrison's side.
Yeah, it feels like one of those instances too where Fanatics specifically would get more out of this if they just let it go. But I think they want to be very careful around not setting a precedent of, hey, if you don't like your deal, we're going to let you get out of it. And I actually think that, most of the commentary around this was that Fanatics was offering these terrible terms to college athletes who were willing to sign it at the time because of NIL, and they wanted cash up front. And then when they got to the NFL, they're worth 10 times more.
Right.
And when I look at the terms and I hear over $1 million for this agreement, that's really not that bad based on everything that I've seen from the market of what these companies are willing to pay. And Fanatics is obviously the biggest, but if you think about Harrison Jr., he got drafted to Arizona, which is a smaller media market than some of the other teams that were in that range. And he hasn't played it down yet, right? So he's obviously or expected to be a very good player. He could be a fantastic player, one of the best at his position, but you're still in a relatively small market. And now you've put yourself in a position where your jersey can't be sold at the most exciting time that there is for fans, right? When the NFL draft comes around, that's usually when they sell the most jerseys. You're potentially not going to be in the video game as a rookie, which I think is another great marketing opportunity, although you don't earn a ton of money. So there's been a few things here and there where I think to myself, like, sure, your family's advising you. You have other advisors that you're paying some rate to potentially. But there's been a few instances where, I just think things probably could have been handled a little bit better, and things have leaked out to the media that are obviously a little bit one-sided. Now we're seeing the other side, and they don't necessarily add up to maybe the best overall deal for him as a rookie.
Yeah, I think when you see estimates of millions of dollars of damages for Fanatics, I don't think it's about the money with them, as you said. Again, they're just rolling in money. They continue to have these massive deals with the NFL and NBA and et cetera. It's about precedent. And as a lawyer, that to me is everything, because if Marvin Harrison can do this, what about the next guy? That's what Fanatics is really trying to protect, the process more than anything else. And for it to get to court, there has had to have been a lot of discussions or just ignoring by the Harrison side. Listen,
well, in the complaint, they say that Marvin Harrison Sr. asked them for the contract. They sent it to him, and he says, "If you think that'll hold up in court, good luck," or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And Fanatics was like, "Well, it will." So we're just going to sue at this point. And it didn't need to get to this point, but to your point, I think Fanatics is trying to protect themselves.
And you mentioned Harrison along with Caleb. There's a couple of things different. Obviously, doing his own contract and this, but also if people noted during the training process, combine, he not only didn't go to the combine and didn't fall in line with most.
He didn't do anything.
Yeah. At least some of these guys do interviews or just show up for the physical. He's not doing that.
Yeah.
And he did no combine specific training, which I know a lot of people ask me, Andrew, is this going to hurt him? And I'm like, well, no, because he'll be the top non-quarterback. And we've kind of known he's going to be the top non-quarterback for a year. So in that way, he kind of bucked the trend and he became this, this maverick out there, not doing what everyone else is doing. But on this side, it doesn't look like he's got a good legal case.
So I'm totally on board with a lot of that, which it sounds like you are as well, of like kind of doing things a little bit differently. He's the 1% again of the 1%. He has the power in this situation to do what he wants to do when it comes to the combine. The problem with that is if you do it and everything else goes well, everyone thinks you're smart. But when you do it and other things go poorly, like this with Fanatics, then everyone thinks it's a pattern, right? Of, oh, does this add to that? And now it's worse. So I think he needs to be a little bit careful. And again, I hope some of this stuff gets cleaned up. But
yeah,
the next thing I want to go ahead.
I think my last comment is agreeing with you. They're difficult, but not different. He's admired for being different, but he doesn't want to be perceived as difficult.
Exactly. So let's talk NFL media rights. They recently signed a deal with Netflix. They're getting supposedly $75 million per game, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, $150 million for the first 2 games next year. They have in the contract, I think it's a 3-year deal, at least 1 game the following year and at least 1 game the year after that. Now, it's worded a little bit weirdly where it says at least 1 holiday game. I don't know necessarily what that means, but there's some room for interpretation there. But Netflix is officially, in the business of live sports now. They've kind of danced around the subject for a little bit. I remember they did the Formula One and the golf series out in Vegas. They did the tennis series. They've done a number of other kind of adjacent sports things that were live. But this is the NFL. I mean, this is the biggest live sports thing that you can do in the United States, and they seem to be kind of going all in. Now, I wrote about this the other day, and many other people that are smarter than me have talked about it as well, of Netflix having this advertising tier now that was recently launched because their subscriptions were growing a little bit slowly and they need content for that. And I think that's really why we've seen a shift in their strategy from saying we're not interested in sports to now going all in with sports, is because there's nothing better for advertisers than sports. It's live events. The commercials are baked in, so everyone watches it, whether you're paying for the advertising tier or not. And they're going to make a boatload of money on this. I was doing some of the math. There's about 100 ad slots per NFL game. If they're able to charge $500,000 for a 30-second commercial, which I think is warranted given they're going to have potentially 20 to 30 million viewers, we're talking about reaching near profitability before even talking about net new subscribers, reduce churn, anything else associated with that. So I think for Netflix, it makes sense. But the reason I want to talk to you about it is from the NFL side, right? If you think about the NFL, they've gone from basically just requiring people to have cable and Sunday ticket to you need everything now. I mean, you need everything outside of Apple, really, right? You need Netflix, you need ESPN Plus, you need Peacock, you need Amazon Prime. All 4 of those streaming services will have exclusive games this upcoming year. Plus, obviously, you need, cable or YouTube TV. You still need Sunday ticket if you want to watch everything. So they've divided everything. And I think in the past, I have, and I'm sure you have, is applauded the NFL at the fact that they've been able to make significantly more money on media rights than other leagues because of that strategy, right? Where they've kind of sliced and diced everything and pushed it out. But one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that the NFL has created a ton more of standalone premium primetime inventory, right? If you think about Black Friday, which they sold to Amazon for $150 million. They have more international games. They have the week 1 game in Brazil this year. They're now doing Christmas Day games. They have the Saturday holiday. When you add it all up, what I think is that the NFL is potentially setting themselves up to opt out of their media rights agreements that they recently signed in 2029, which is, 5 years down the road. But 5 years is kind of like tomorrow in the media business, right? These deals are going to be negotiated 18 to 24 months in advance. That's 2 to 3 years from now. And I think what Roger Goodell has done a fantastic job of is exactly that, is spreading things out. Now, my question to you is, 1, do you think that's what they're doing? But 2, do you think this backfires on them at all? Like, is there any little bit of subscription fatigue or oversaturation? People have been talking about this for years, and the quote I always like to use is Mark Cuban, feels like probably a decade ago saying that the NFL was getting greedy and pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, and, it was going to turn out bad. That hasn't happened, but it feels like they continue to push those boundaries, and we're getting closer and closer to that.
But we're not there. That's the thing. That I understand the Cuban comment. I understand this slow creep the NFL is doing in all these games, all these standalone games. And there doesn't seem to be any true threats to the NFL's continued prosperity and popularity when they did these deals, cumulative $110 billion a couple of years ago over 11 years, we all just shocked, of course, raised our eyebrows. Oh my God, it's the biggest deals in history. The NFL got such a great deal from all these networks, from, of course, the traditional Fox, CBS, ESPN, and of course the new Amazon. Now, as you suggested, I think the networks got a bargain because you look at these games, they're just destroying ratings at every single day part, every single year. After, an NFL weekend, you just kind of assume you're going to get these PR releases from CBS and Fox and ESPN. Best game ever, best game ever. Well, it just becomes old hat. So now, as you suggested, they're definitely going to opt out because you see these deals as good deals for CBS and ESPN and Fox and Amazon rather than good deals for the NFL. Now, what are they doing? They're creating these other forms of content, these other deliveries. Somewhere in the NFL power structure, they've decided they want to do this, and it's proof correct. You mentioned Netflix. They just last year they said we're not going to program on Christmas. It's a Wednesday. And now they're programming on Christmas 2 games at 75 million a game to Netflix. They bring Netflix into the boat.
Well, and one of the secrets here is that I've heard, as I'm sure other people have heard, that there were other people willing to offer more money for this, which I think is an important distinction because that proves that they wanted to be partnered with Netflix specifically.
They're in the boat. They're in the boat. Now they have Netflix along with all the other partners you talked about. And yeah, we have this consternation in the media about, who's going to buy the NBC Peacock game? Well, everyone's buying it. Who's going to buy the Black Friday game? Everyone. That's who.
Yeah, the Peacock game was the biggest subscriber acquisition event in streaming history. In streaming history, literally 3 million people signed up in one day for Peacock. And the best part is everyone said, we're just going to cancel. Everyone's going to cancel. The churn's going to be insane. Right. And that wasn't true. Now, there was 30% churn, which is higher than normal for sure. But the fact that 70% of the people that paid for that game on that day were still subscribed 3 months later is incredible. And I think that showed everyone else, Amazon, Netflix, everyone else, that they need to be involved. And Amazon's actually a great example because Amazon had the choice to buy that game. Through their Thursday Night Football deal, they were given the first crack at it. They turned it down. Peacock said, okay, we'll take it. They had an awesome event. Now, look, it was the Chiefs. It was in the heart of, Kelsey, Mahomes, Taylor Swift, that whole deal. Yeah, it was a great game. Yeah, it was great. And the PR I actually think probably helped, right? Everyone angry about Peacock. It's like $5-6 a month. I think everyone saw, okay, this is actually a pretty decent deal. We'll go sign up. Now, to be determined if this Christmas Day game is as good, because on the other side of the coin, you can look at what happened on Black Friday, where Amazon paid $100 million for a Black Friday game, and they got Zach Wilson and the Jets versus the Dolphins, and less than 10 million people watched because it was a terrible game. So the matchups are a little hit or miss, but on Christmas Day with the Chiefs, I think that the people at Netflix have to be pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Netflix strategy. Ted Sarandos, the CEO, said last year, we're not anti-sports, we're pro-profit. They haven't done live rights. They've done Raw with WWE, which is scripted programming. Of course, they've done the docuseries Drive to Survive and Full Swing and Point Break. I think that they've decided we're going to hit these little one-offs. We're not going to spend billions on rights like the big rights fees are, but we're going to spend hundreds of millions. And it's an interesting strategy where now they're in, and believe you me, I'll put a stake in the ground. This is not the last Netflix buy with the NFL. There's going to be a lot bigger buys in the future, especially when we get to 2029 and everything's up for sale again at numbers that we won't believe again. So good on Netflix and the NFL. Listen, let me just say this about the NFL. Remember when, everybody listening, the whole Ray Rice thing was going to kill the NFL? Not kill it, but denigrate the popularity. Remember when the concussion issue was going to denigrate the popularity? Remember when the Colin Kaepernick athlete activism issue, the flag, the anthem was going to denigrate the popularity? Remember, nothing can derail this incredible popularity of the NFL. And they're just picking off Netflix, whatever they need. And again, there's going to be some mild complaining and everyone will buy in. I don't know where we get to that point that Mark Cuban talked about, who I think is extremely bright. I just don't know what that point is. We're not there.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add on this is Roger Goodell recently made a few remarks that I think are very important in the context of media rights going into 2029. And the two things that he said that were really interesting to me were an 18th game regular season, which I think is almost a certainty at this point that that's probably going to be happening under the next
Yeah.
CBA. He said it's going to happen on his watch. If you think he's going to be the commissioner for the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to happen during the next CBA. That CBA, I believe, is due for renegotiation in 2030.
2030, yeah.
So that times up with the media rights stuff, right?
They're going to, last one did. Yeah.
As the last one did, right? That's intentional, of course. And then if you think about the international schedule, he also talked about, everyone's always been saying that, we're going to add a team in Europe or a division in Europe. And a lot of people have said for a period of time that didn't make sense for a number of reasons. And what I think Roger Goodell confirmed was that rather than doing that, there's just going to be a full slate of games every single week, right? One game per week that's international. It's full 16, 17, 18 game schedule. So you're going to wake up at 8:39 in the morning, watch a football game. You're going to watch a game at 1. You're going to watch a game at 4. You're going to watch a game at 8:30. Yeah. And when you think about all the deals ending in 2029, the 18th game being added in 2030, a full international slate of schedules, all the individual games that we just talked about kind of around the holidays and things like that, plus Sunday Ticket coming up for renewal too. All of a sudden, you're Roger Goodell. You look at the NBA, whose product is not nearly as good or as popular as yours is, and they're going to sign somewhere between a 2 to 3 times increase in rights for a product that's ratings are essentially flat year over year. You're the NFL. You're licking your chops, I think, if you're Roger Goodell, and saying, we're going to sign a massive increase compared to where we were previously. Now, the only problem is that with the kind of decline of broadcast, even with streaming increasing, there's sort of like a filter on how much these companies can pay, where I think the NFL more than anyone can demand them to go a little bit higher. There's always going to be a little bit of a ceiling. But you've said it, I've said it at this point. I think the NFL is headed, by the end of this decade to massively increase their rights much higher than they are today.
You're right. They have got to a point where they destroyed the NBA on Christmas. That was the province of the NBA, right? And then they just jump in and take it over. The NBA's got to be sitting there. What are we doing here? And like you said, the NBA went triple. It's not done yet. Obviously, we have a year left in their ordeal, but 2025 starting looks like 75 billion. Like going from 25 billion to 75 billion for the NBA. Now, that's not NFL money, but that is serious. $75 billion for the NBA between what looks like NBC along with ESPN and Amazon. Yeah, the NFL will jump off that. I got a comment on the 18 games, Joe. I was stunned. He's just said that so nonchalantly, casually on the Pat McAfee show. Roger Goodell talking about 18 games. Remember, in 2020, the 17 games was a huge issue for both sides. At one point, DeMaurice Smith and the NFLPA leadership said, that's a non-negotiable. We're not going there. Somehow, some way, it became a non-negotiable on the other side where the NFL said, we're not doing a deal without a 17th game. They get that in, just adding inventory, adding player wear and tear for another game, and then went to the networks and say, listen, we got labor peace for 10 years, and we got a 17th game. Bring it on. Just throw us money. And like you said, they're going to do it again.
And the reason why I think it's important why they're going to do it again and why I think it will get passed again and why I think that he says it not so nonchalantly is because he knows that it will get passed again, is because it's important context that they're going to eliminate a preseason game, right? So he's essentially going to tell the players, look, you guys are going to suit up for this game anyways. Now it's going to be a real game instead of a preseason game. Everyone hates training camp. We'll make it a week shorter. Right. Great, cool. Everyone can agree with that, although it's different. But the more important part is that the players share in the revenue of the NFL, right? And the reason why that's important is because if you split revenue 50-50, like basically all of the major 4 sports leagues do, when the NFL makes more money, you make more money too. And at the end of the day, the union represents all of the players, not just the best players who make the most money and don't need more money. And what they're going to say is, look, guys, the salary cap is going to go up by X number of dollars if we're able to negotiate these in the new media rights. So we just saw a massive jump this year, and the same thing can happen if we agree to an 18th game. And that was the thing, I said it at the time when that 17th game got approved. The 18th game was always coming, right? Like it made more sense. And now Goodell's spinning this whole narrative of we're going to eliminate the preseason game. We're going to add a second bye week. We're going to push the Super Bowl back a week. And now it's going to be a 3-day weekend on President's Day weekend. And fans love it. They don't even ask questions. They're like 3-day weekend for the Super Bowl. That sounds great. So it's all about the narrative, right? And how you spin these things. And I think that he has a way with his words and convincing the union that it's good for them. Ultimately, making more money is good for the players, given that the career length is so short. The networks are going to love it. And obviously the NFL is going to love it because it's going to increase their rights over time.
Yeah, on the player side, I've been very obviously covering for a long time the CBA relationship. And yes, it does look good in the end. And Goodell can spin it out in the media that this is the sharing, the revenues, and the players get their 48%. Only people like me kind of know it's not really 48%. You know, 20 billion in revenue, the players aren't getting 10 billion, anywhere near 10 billion right now, because there are all these exclusions, and we won't go down this rabbit hole, but players don't get a share of naming rights, of relocation money, of franchise entry money, of suite money, of club seat money, of gambling money in many situations. So by the time all these exclusions, the percentage is way lower than 48%. I would hazard a guess in around 40% or something like that. But, you know, it sounds great. Hey, add more money with
they do get a split of TV money.
That's obviously in the share. Yes,
yeah.
Of course. It's so all TV money and ticket money and all that stuff, licensing, sponsorships. But there are exclusions where it's not exactly 48%, not even close, really.
So, some financial engineering going on for sure, which brings me to something else I want to talk about, which is the Chicago Bears stadium and just stadium financing in general. People have seen over the last few weeks that the Chicago Bears have, not even the last few weeks, the last few months and even years at this point, the Chicago Bears are trying to build a new stadium. Their stadium is 100 years old. It's the smallest in the NFL. They want to build a new stadium. Now, the debate has been whether they're going to do it in the suburbs or in downtown Chicago. They started out in the suburbs. They actually paid, $100 million for more than that for a property in Arlington Heights. And they've been debating whether they were going to build a stadium there. But now they come out and they say they're going to build one in downtown Chicago. Now, the plan and the renderings for this stadium look amazing. They look great. It looks like a beautiful stadium, probably one of the best in the world immediately. The problem is when you dig into the details, the deal is not nearly as good as it sounds from the surface, at least in my opinion, and I'll let you give yours. But I think what I saw at first was that the team was going to be paying over 70% for the stadium. Private money was going to be over 70%. And I actually think that would be a great deal, right? If you think about public versus private money, there's not many stadiums that actually have more than 70% in private money coming into it, especially a city like Chicago where the team brings in a lot of revenue on game days and things like that and isn't going to be leaving. So I think that would have been great. But again, when you dig into the details, there's an additional, $1.5 billion that's needed. That's for infrastructure outside the stadium that the team's obviously not going to be paying for. They want 100% of the revenue on non-NFL events too. So they want to make money from, Taylor Swift coming to town or the Final Four or World Cup matches or other things like that. So there's a few other things that are happening here. And I think, personally, there's a very small chance that this agreement goes through in the way that it goes through. Because one, the governor has already said that it's a non-starter and non-negotiable, which I think is an important point to make. But also, the hotel tax needs to be amended for it to happen. They have to vote on this rather soonly. I think ultimately they either wanted to start, in a place where they knew wasn't going to happen to settle on a place that they think is more advantageous to them, or they are using this as a negotiation of sorts to get a little bit more leverage in the suburbs for another project. What is your read on this deal overall and kind of your thought process as you go through the different parts?
I think it's an opening offer. And what we've seen over the past 3 years is extraordinary amounts. I mean, I keep talking about Buffalo getting $850 million for the Pagulas to build the stadium, $600 from the state of New York, which most of New York is not near Buffalo. And then, of course, $250 million from Erie County. And then to top that, Nashville, oh my God, $1.2 billion basically to build a new stadium for the Titans. Think about that, $1.2 billion subsidy to subsidize billionaire owners who have an asset worth $5 billion. That's what's going on. Now, what is the leverage that these owners have? I don't know. It's this perceived subtle or not so subtle threat that they may move. Even New York Governor Hochul mentioned that. They're not going to move.
Well, especially in Chicago. Think about
They're
Chicago. It's
not
one of
going
the
to move.
biggest
Yeah.
TV markets in the country. They're not moving anywhere.
Any team, where are they going to move? Austin? Where are they going to move? Toronto? St. Louis? No, no, no one's moving. But what governor, what politician is going to have that 0.0000001% that they lose the team? No one's going to do that. So we're going to see a reckoning here. As you mentioned, Governor Pritzker not too happy about this proposal. It really is, as you mentioned, kind of a split 50-50. Hey, we'll pay $1.3 billion, you pay $1.3 billion. And this is going on, as people know, around these jurisdictions in Cleveland and also in Kansas City. The defending Super Bowl champions are trying to get $500 million. They whiffed on the referendum, the tax measure in the vote, by 58-42. It's like a hard no. And now we deal with Kansas perhaps getting involved, or other politicians in Jackson County. So we'll see what happens with them. I was involved in a renovation of Lambeau Field in 2002-3, and the most football crazy city in America. We barely got it passed, a half-cent sales tax in our county. And I was going door to door. I mean, that was a big part of our jobs, like get this passed. And of course, we did the renovation for numbers that are just minuscule compared to now. We'll see. Now, as I say this, Jacksonville, not a football crazy town, is talking about $700 million of public money to finance the Jaguars, who are not even there for a game a year because they're in London. So 7 home games a year or 8 home games a year in alternate seasons, they're going to fund $700 million. So again, I don't know the leverage, but it seems like these politicians, with the minuscule chance that they may lose the team or something may happen, they're funding the money. And if, gun to my head, Joe, this will happen in Chicago. Maybe not for the half cost of $1.3 billion, but Chicago will pay up, and
Yeah.
Cleveland and Kansas City.
Yeah. I think if I had to guess right now, a downtown stadium
Yeah.
gets done in some capacity. I think it's not nearly as good of a deal as it is now for the Bears, but it gets done in some capacity. Although I would say, though, that there's an interesting angle they could take, which is going out to the suburbs. And one of the examples I like to use is what the Braves did, right? And the Braves
Right.
built out the Battery in Atlanta. They moved from, downtown Atlanta to the suburbs in Cobb County. It's not nearly as far away, but the, public transportation is obviously a little bit different and stuff. So people complain. They said, why would we go out there? We want to be in the city. That's where teams should be. But what it allowed them to do is open the Battery, which is this mixed use development. It has restaurants and hotels and corporate buildings and things like that. They make tens of millions of dollars off that every single year now by leasing it out and things like that, the property. And the interesting part about that is that this revenue doesn't have to be shared, right? It's real estate for the team. So if you're able to partner with an organization, and if specifically with the NFL, if we think about private equity bidders able to come in and buy smaller stakes in the teams, potentially at some point in the near future, that seems like that could be a pretty lucrative option if you're able to get a deal that is appropriate in the suburbs, right? You can build kind of infrastructure around the stadium and transform the value of the franchise by making it more of a holding company with real estate around it. And I think that's something that the Bears should consider, although they would have to leave downtown to make that happen.
This is the change in stadium finance that we've seen over the last 20 years. And again, I was just at the beginning of it in Green Bay. But now it's not about it's not so much about stadium economics. It's about general economics around the stadium. What can you build? What can you monetize? What can you add to your 10 games a year? At Lambeau Field, we obviously realize it can't just be 10 games a year. It can't be 10 days a year to build off revenue. We built an atrium. We built a Packer Hall of Fame. We put our pro shop in there. We built a restaurant, ice cream, little trinket stores, all kinds of little shops. You had to make it a destination, even in the frigid cold of Green Bay. People come there all times a year because they want to hang out at Lambeau Field. That's what you talk about Cobb's, what they did in Atlanta. Great. I mean, this is what all these developments are talking about, stadiums as part of a bigger residential real estate, mixed use entertainment complex. This started back with Stan Kroenke and SoFi Stadium. So this will continue. And I was a little bit cynical about about the public monies, but this is where it works. This is where you bring another aspect to your domain, to your city living or suburban living that hopefully is good for everyone.
The one thing I don't want to see is Chicago build a stadium with taxpayer money and not make it a dome. I think that is a huge problem with what they did in Buffalo, because Buffalo is a little bit unique in the fact where they may not get all these events anyways, but Chicago is a big city. And if they do it right, they could get amazing events outside of NFL season. And if you don't build a dome, you're sacrificing all of that. And the reason that's important is not just for fans and local residents to enjoy it. The reason it's important is because most of the tax benefits come when people outside of your city travel into your city for events, right? If you or I live in Chicago and we go to a game, that's money that we may not spend elsewhere, right? If families have budgets, things like that. So it's not net new tax money. The net new tax money comes when people travel in. And I think that's an important distinction of why these mixed use venues are so important. We're seeing, other teams prioritize them as well, especially in cold weather environments like Chicago.
I have to laugh because when we went through this renovation, that was a thought at Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And the backlash was strong, immediate, swift, and severe. Yeah. Like, no way would we ever think about a dome because of the home field advantage and the legacy and lore.
For sure. And I don't think Buffalo, a lot of the fans care either. I think they would rather it be open. And, when I tweet about it, people say, this is what Buffalo is meant to be. We like the cold weather games, all that stuff. I think Lambeau is probably a little bit unique too, similar to Buffalo, where it's different when you're not a major city, right? You would need more hotel rooms and things like that to be able to operate some of these events. And I think that's part of the reason why Green Bay got the draft, right? Is because they're not going to be able to host a Super Bowl. So it's like you get the draft, which I think is great for the city and is going to be really enjoyable too.
Yeah, but genius by the NFL to reward teams like that aren't going to get Super Bowls.
Oh, it's another chip in their pocket, right? If you want to go build a new stadium, you used to get the Super Bowl, but how do you incentivize teams that aren't going to be able to host the Super Bowl? Oh, now we have this, this event that's gotten pretty big. We have hundreds of thousands of people attending. They fly in from all over the country and world, and you'll be able to host that. And he even mentioned it during the draft. He said that cities are now bidding on it, right? They're trying to figure out how they can get it. And I think that's just, another thing in the NFL's pocket of how they've done business really incredibly well. But one thing I want to talk about that's off topic with the NFL, and we mentioned this kind of before we started here, was some of the stuff going on in the WNBA. If you think about the WNBA, the business of the WNBA has obviously gotten discussed a lot over the last several months with Caitlin Clark arriving and TV ratings soaring and all of that stuff. But specifically, I want to talk about one of the things that came up over the last few days here, which was the Las Vegas Aces, who are, by and large, the best team in the WNBA, defending champions. And they had essentially what is like a big group NIL deal happen, right? Yeah. Which is where Las Vegas is going to be paying them. I think it's the tourism. What is it? The tourism board of Las Vegas?
Convention Bureau.
Yeah, Convention Bureau. They're going to pay each player on the team guaranteed $100,000. So everyone's getting the same deal, $100,000. And for context, it's probably widely accepted at this point, but WNBA salaries aren't that high, right? The best players on the team are making $250,000. So $100,000 is very significant, especially for the players on the team that are making less than $100,000. So you have a sponsor come in and basically double some of the players' salaries overnight. And the reason I want to talk about this is because the WNBA is reportedly going to investigate this deal and is saying, essentially, in short, that they want to make sure this doesn't violate the salary cap for some reason or kind of give them a competitive advantage. What is your thought process on a deal like that? How it's structured, but also whether it should be allowed or not in the current standing of the WNBA?
It's fascinating to me because this brings in a lot of our discussion about college sports over the last year. College sports moving to pro sports. Is this an endorsement or is this really pay for play? This is what we've asked about college deals. We've had name, image, likeness since 2021. The idea is the player, the college student athlete had to do something to get the money. Go do appearances, do autograph signings, be in commercials, be in Instagram shout outs, whatever it be. But we've seen over the years with college sports become, no, you just have to play. I mean, this is just pay for play. It's NIL has become quote unquote salary. Mm-hmm. Now we move it to the pros. And this guy, I saw the video, he comes in, hey, we're going to give you all $100,000. Now, is it a sponsorship or is it pay for play? And this is what the NBA wants to see. Is this what I'm familiar with in my days with the NFL? Cap circumvention. Are they getting around the salary cap? Now, the claim by the LVCB, the Convention Bureau, is that we didn't even talk to the team about this. We are so separate from the team, they didn't even know about this. Well, how did they get in the locker room? I don't know. But anyway, so then the WNBA is going to be looking at, well, is this just extra compensation? Does this put the Aces at a competitive advantage from everyone else? Does this upset competitive balance? Can other teams do this and just go around the salary cap? And instead of players making an average of 100 a year, they're making 200,000. What's going on here? So they're going to look into it. But what's not good for this endorsement is, well, wait a minute, you're paying the 12th player on the team the same as Kelsey Plum. I mean, is that really what you're doing here? Why aren't they making different? Their fair market value is so different. But I think the WNBA is going to have a hard time proving cap circumvention if they are all doing something for this. It's an endorsement, and they're making appearances on behalf of Vegas. But it does put them, whatever you say, as a little bit of an advantage. Now, what's the advantage worth? Are there a lot of free agents going to be going to Vegas? Well, the contracts don't allow for a lot of free agency in the WNBA. So I don't know if it'll put them in necessarily a competitive advantage, but I think it's fascinating because what we've all learned from the Caitlin Clark phenomenon is how little WNBA players make from their salaries. And this is a boost that, again, for players on the bottom of the Aces, they're going to get more from this deal than their salary.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think they'll look into it, but I don't think it'll go anywhere.
I don't think it's going to go anywhere either, but I could see why they're looking into it, right? If you think about what the WNBA has done in the past, the example I always like to use is Joe Tsai, who owns the Brooklyn Nets and obviously the New York Liberty, right? He famously flew his team on chartered flights, right?
Yeah.
And he was willing to pay that out of pocket. It wasn't a league thing. He did it himself. And he also, I think, took them on a vacation to like wine country, right? Like Napa or something like that. And the WNBA came down hard on him. They fined him a lot of money. And essentially what they said was that there's little things that you can do outside of the salary cap that aren't allowed because it offers you a competitive advantage with free agents. But it also offers you a competitive advantage when playing. Obviously, chartered flights, you get more sleep, travel's a little bit easier, whatever. Yeah. That's an obvious one. But the way I think about what the WNBA is currently going through today is we're going to see an arms race with facilities because of this. If you think about WNBA facilities, some of them are awful. I mean, some of them are like high school gyms. I've seen some of the players talk about the fact that they don't even use the same locker every year, that they have, different practices are held in different stadia or different arenas around the city. So some of the facilities are awful. And what we've seen is the Aces, Seattle, and a few other teams have now built really nice facilities. And what that's done is it helps you attract free agents. They want to go play where they're going to be treated well, where the facilities are nice, where they're going to be taken care of. And now there's chartered flights and it all adds up, right? So I think Las Vegas, this is just another thing that they can kind of add to their pocket of saying, hey, look how our players get treated. And I think that really does help in free agency when you're considering, if you're going to make everyone's got the same salary, give or take, because of the caps, those small things really can add up. And I think that's an advantage for Las Vegas.
Well said. I mean, Caitlin Clark, I don't think people realize the impact. Look what she's doing here. She has really transformed the whole view of the WNBA. First of all, as I said, letting people know how little players make in salary. But arenas are changing, right? For her game, now they're going from their 3,500 seat arena to the NBA arena in that city, holding 20,000 people. She has drawn television viewers, obviously, bringing over from the college days at Iowa. I said this when she was in college, Joe, she's a force multiplier. Mm-hmm. Whatever the reason is, the logo threes, the Steph Curry type shooting, the homegrown, homespun Midwest girl, I mean, it's happened. And this is the consequence, maybe unintended, for the WNBA. They got to step it up, right? She is making them step it up. Like, you can't just be this little league that no one pays attention to anymore except hardcore women's basketball. You've got to step it up. You've got to be more professional. You've got to realize there are other forces coming into this with endorsements and now this deal with the Las Vegas Aces, who a lot of people didn't even know won the last two championships. And here we are. And it's Caitlin. in Dallas visiting my son, and I had a choice between going to the Mavs playoff game and the Wings preseason game. And I went to the Wings because Caitlin. I went.
Yeah,
And I'm like a fanboy and I'm taking pictures of her and I'm like
it's
videoing
amazing.
her first shot, which I put on Instagram. I'm like, I'm a fanboy. Look at that. So she has changed the game. And as I keep saying, the WNBA, hey, that's great, but step it up. Like
Yeah.
charter flights, now we got a few, Caitlin's team, of course, but you can't just roll it out with three, four teams. I
Yeah.
mean, they've got to be ready for this, and maybe they weren't quite for the phenomenon that she is.
Well, the most important thing is that ratings continue to get higher, right? And I
Of
think
course.
that that's what they should be most focused on. I'm watching the first game and I was so frustrated because they got the referee in there and he calls these like two ticky tack fouls on her and then she sits out the whole first quarter.
Yeah.
And not only were they not fouls, but they were like, you probably shouldn't really call them anyways, even if they were a little bit of contact. Not only because she's Caitlin Clark, but like let them play a little bit. And I think like that's the kind of stuff that they need to get in control a little bit because the ratings are really what's going to make you the money, right? If you want to pay for the charter flights, the ratings are where it's going to be really important. And she had a big, her first game was obviously really well received. I think it was the most watched WNBA game in like over 20 years. But the one after that was still pretty big by all comparisons. I think it had like 650,000 viewers, which again is small compared to the NFL. But for the WNBA, that's like WNBA finals viewership right there. So I think that that's what they got to focus on and that's what they got to keep doing. But the one thing I want to talk to you about before we end this is Jared Goff. We were talking about this a little bit before, and I just want to get your kind of take on, obviously he just signed a massive contract extension that was sort of unique and huge in the same sentence. So just give me your opinion and kind of your analysis of that deal overall.
Yeah, I mean, I analyze contracts. I've done it for so many years, and a lot of them just kind of fall into this big pattern. Yeah, that filed that guy. That's just like that guy. It's what we expect this contract would be. Goff struck me because he was a throwaway, or some would say a throw in, for the Rams to get Matthew Stafford. No one really talked about Goff. It's like, yeah, we'll give him a quarterback back. And they actually threw in extra draft picks with Goff
Yep.
to get Matthew Stafford. As everyone knows, this was like a trade where there was no comparison between these two quarterbacks. He was a throw in. Wow. I mean, we can debate what he's done on the field. And of course, getting the championship game last year, the team looks like it's set to get to the Super Bowl, perhaps. But off the field, I'm stunned by this contract, Joe. $73 million signing bonus. That just blows away any signing bonus in NFL history. Think about that. Jared Goff. That's the guy who's got the biggest signing bonus in history, the biggest first year money. In 2024, he'll make $81 million. No one's ever made that.
And I hope the signing bonus is structured 100% payment up front. So one day he just gets a $73 million deposit in his account because that would have to be the most amazing feeling in the entire world.
And 3-year money is a marker that I look like when I judge contracts because whether guaranteed or not, that tends to be the real deal. 3 years. His 3-year number is $151 million. Think about that. 151 over 3. The only one above that in history is Lamar at 156. And Lamar was coming off a franchise tag. So the second highest 3-year number in history, like blowing away everybody, the ones we did last year with Burrow and Herbert and Hurts and everyone but Lamar, and then above the contract we all talked about for 2 years, Deshaun Watson. So it doesn't have the Watson guarantees, but just that number. And I'm looking at Jared Goff. I'm looking at this mild-mannered guy out of Cal who is kind of just kind of an afterthought. I thought, I'm supposed to be a football expert. Okay, he's going to bridge the Lions till they get the rookie and, whatever. No, he's the real deal and paid like it. That's a contract. Not many after so many years make me go, wow.
It's amazing because it feels like that was a good deal for both teams involved, right? Obviously, the Rams got Stafford, but they won a Super Bowl, and then you're Detroit, you got Jared Goff back, which I think everyone else was kind of on your thought process of this is just a bridge. He's a guy that's going to be here for a few years, but they've really done some amazing things in that city. But this was great, Andrew. Thank you so much for doing this.
One thing before we go, if I could ask you, because you did a great thing on social media and your newsletter about the Timberwolves sale. Now we're recording this as the Timberwolves are now poised in the Western Conference Finals, just knocked off the champs. What an exciting team. Of course, Anthony Edwards. I mean, they're just like everybody's in on the Timberwolves right now. So this 2-part or 3-part, or you could explain for us sort of the the sale factor with Glenn Taylor selling to A-Rod and Lore. It didn't go through. Did they miss a payment? Is the deal off that they missed the payment? Where do
Yeah.
we stand on Timberwolves ownership? We see A-Rod at the game hugging the Timberwolves players like he is the owner. Maybe he is partial owner.
A-Rod was in the locker room last night.
Yeah, where is it stand right now?
So it's going to be in mediation and arbitration, and they're going to go back and forth, right? But ultimately, Glenn Taylor thinks the team is no longer for sale. Alex Rodriguez and Mark Laurie, who's his partner on the deal, think that they have a very clear path and an ironclad legal agreement to take over the team. Now, what I found in the report that you're referencing here is that Glenn Taylor has done a lot of shady things over the last 12 to 18 months, basically to maintain control of the team. And it seems like this was kind of always in the cards for him. And I think one important thing to note with this story is that when Glenn Taylor went to go sell the team, he has publicly denied this. In fact, he said the opposite, which was that A-Rod and Mark came to him, he named the price, they named the terms. That's what he says. But Adam Silver has said the opposite, and I've heard the opposite, which is that Glenn Taylor was the one who wanted to push this thing out over 3 years, right? So they were going to be buying the team in 4 different tranches with different percentages for each one. They've done 2 of those payments. The third one was going to give them majority control. When that third one came due, Glenn Taylor said, oh, you guys missed the payment. Team's no longer for sale. You're limited partners. And the frustrating part about that is obviously not that you're not majority owners, which is a whole nother story. But they paid a premium for basically 36 to 40% of the team right now. Whereas you would typically pay a 30 to 40% discount for those shares because you're a limited partner. So they massively overpaid, and the valuation would have to go up significantly for them to even break even if they stayed as limited partners. Now, I've talked to people that have reviewed this deal. The contract is public because Glenn Taylor actually got sued from another limited partner because one of the things that was shady that he did was that instead of selling other people's equity along the way, he only sold his equity, right? So he owned about 70% of the team, and the 36% that was sold all came from him to A-Rod and Mark. Now, he dropped below them 34% to 36% in equity. Right. And that wouldn't have mattered because they were going to be majority owners anyways through this next transaction. But the part where LPs are really frustrated is he secretly went and he bought a 3% stake from another LP named Bill Sexton. And the reason he did that was because he knew that he was going to take this to court, and now he wanted 37% of the team compared to their 36% of the team, and he wants to be the majority owner. Wow. So look, they all have their own stories about why this is happening. Everyone I've talked to on both sides of this has basically indicated they think it's going to end up with A-Rod and Mark taking over the team. The one caveat to all of this is that Glenn Taylor historically kind of gets what he wants. He has lived in Minnesota his whole life. He was a senator there. He owns the team. He owns the newspaper. He's the wealthiest guy around. In a lot of ways, he kind of dictates how these things go, especially because the judge that's going to be trying this case is in Minnesota. So there's a little bit of concern there with this stuff because politics can play a role sometimes. But everything I've read, everything I've heard, everyone that I've asked about this says that the agreement is ironclad. They had, the stipulations in place where it was going to be extended an additional time frame because the NBA was reviewing the deal and needed to interview some of the LPs as part of the agreement. And there shouldn't have been a problem. Glenn Taylor kind of came out of nowhere and said team's not for sale. And the obvious reason is twofold. Number one, the team's much better now, and they're going to compete for potentially a championship this year. But number two is the team's valuation has gone up tremendously. The deal was initially done at $1.5 billion. I've been told there's a 4% price escalator in the agreement, so each payment goes up by 4%. But the team has doubled in value, which is $3 billion now. So obviously he's leaving a ton of money on the table for him and his LPs, which he wants to potentially get back by taking the team off the market and selling them at a later date.
Well, my first question was, why would A-Rod and Lore miss the payment? Because if they're stuck on money, if they need some cash, obviously any bank's going to say, well, you're A-Rod, and this is the Timberwolves, who are now valued twice as what they were, to help them out to get that payment done. Did they actually miss the payment? And why? No,
they didn't miss the payment. They didn't miss the payment. What happened was they had an agreement in place with a firm. That firm, the Carlyle Group, does business, has a bunch of smaller businesses, right? They own a bunch of firms. And one of their companies, I've been told, was used by a bunch of NBA players. It's a wealth management firm that's used by NBA players. The NBA told them, you need to divest from that business if you want to invest in this team. They said, no, thanks, we're out of the deal. So then they went to Dial Capital Partners, who's a pre-approved partner, owns equity in a bunch of different teams. Dial said, great, we're in, we'll do the deal. They brought it to the NBA. The NBA then had to go interview all the LPs LPs involved. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, is an LP in the deal, right? So they got to bring him in for an interview. That hadn't been done yet. So it was going to automatically extend the agreement by 30 days. And that's when Glenn Taylor said, oh, it's not done? See you later. Deal's off. When the agreement very clearly says, I mean, it's online, you can read it. It clearly says that they're going to have an additional 30 days if the NBA, if all financials have been submitted, but the NBA has not approved a deal. And the most obvious indicator of this is that no one would have a hard time raising money for this. I could go raise money for this because the valuation has doubled. So much so that A-Rod was reportedly trying to arbitrage the deal by say that the team was, they're getting it at $1.5 billion, it's worth $3 billion. He was trying to sell shares at $2 billion. Right? To pocket the difference because he knows and everyone else knows that the valuation went up. Now, maybe he wasn't able to do that on the end of it because he had to scramble and get another partner. But ultimately, raising money for a deal that has already doubled in value was never going to be a problem. And it wasn't a problem in this case.
That's great. So we're in arbitration.
Yep. Yeah. And throughout the process, I guess news just came out. I read it on the Sportico earlier was that, A-Rod and Mark tried to tell Glenn Taylor, winner take all. You have to, whoever loses has to pay legal fees for the other person. And Glenn Taylor said no. But that makes me feel, makes me think that they feel pretty confident about the outcome of kind of how this is going to be going in court.
A little awkward at these games now with both of them there.
They sit across from each other.
Yeah, that's like, okay, we should get coverage of that from TNT. Yeah,
we should. This was great though, Andrew. Thank you so much for doing this. I always have a great time talking with you. And I look forward to doing it again next time.
Likewise, Joe. Always a pleasure. Really enjoy these.